There are still harmless self-observers who believe that there are immediate certainties. For instance, I think, or, as the superstition of Schopenhauer puts it, I will, as though cognition here got hold of its object purely and simply as the thing in itself, without any falsification taking place either on the part of the subject or the object. I would repeat it, however, 100 times, that immediate certainty, as well as absolute knowledge, and the thing in itself, involve a contradictio in adjecto. We really ought to free ourselves from the misleading significance of words. The people on their part may think that cognition is knowing all about things, but the philosopher must say to himself, when I analyze the process that is expressed in the sentence I think, I find a whole series of daring assertions, the argumentative proof of which would be difficult, perhaps impossible. For instance, that it is I who think, that there must necessarily be something that thinks, that thinking is an activity, an operation on the part of a being who is thought of as a cause, that there is an ego, and finally, it is already determined what is to be designated by thinking, that I know what thinking is. For if I had not already decided within myself what it is, by what standard could I determine whether that which is just happening is not perhaps willing or feeling? In short, the assertion, I think, assumes that I compare my state at the present moment with other states of myself which I know, in order to determine what it is. On account of this retrospective connection with further knowledge, it has at any rate no immediate certainty for me. In place of the immediate certainty in which the people may believe in the special case, the philosopher thus finds a series of metaphysical questions presented to him, veritable conscience questions of the intellect, to wit, whence did I get the notion of thinking? Why do I believe in cause and effect? What gives me the right to speak of an ego, and even of an ego as cause, and finally of an ego as cause of thought? He who ventures to answer these metaphysical questions at once by an appeal to a sort of intuitive perception, like the person who says, I think, and I know this, at least, is true, actual, and certain, will encounter a smile, and 2 notes of interrogation in a philosopher nowadays. Sir, the philosopher will perhaps give him to understand, it is improbable that you are not mistaken, but why should it be the truth? With regard to the superstitions of logicians, I shall never tire of emphasizing a small terse fact, which is unwillingly recognized by these credulous minds, namely, that a thought comes when it wishes, and not when I wish. So it is a perversion of the facts of the case to say that the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. One thinks. But that this one is precisely the famous old ego is, to put it mildly, only a supposition, an assertion, and assuredly not an immediate certainty. After all, one has even gone too far with this one thinks. Even the one contains an interpretation of the process and does not belong to the process itself. One infers here, according to the usual grammatical formula, to think is an activity. Every activity requires an agency that is active. Consequently, it was pretty much on the same lines that the older atomism sought, besides the operating power, the material particle wherein it resides and out of which it operates, the atom. More rigorous minds, however, led at last to get along without this earth residuum, and perhaps some day we shall accustom ourselves, even from the logician's perspective, to get along without the little one, to which the worthy old ego has refined itself. It is certainly not the least charm of a theory that it is irrefutable. It is precisely thereby that it attracts the more subtle minds. It seems that the 100 times refuted theory of the free will owes its persistence to this charm alone. Someone is always appearing who feels himself strong enough to refute it. Philosophers are accustomed to speak of the will as though it were the best known thing in the world. Indeed, Schopenhauer has given us to understand that the will alone is really known to us, absolutely and completely known, without deduction or addition. But it again and again seems to me that in this case Schopenhauer also only did what philosophers are in the habit of doing. He seems to have adopted a popular prejudice and exaggerated it. Willing seems to me to be above all something complicated, something that is a unity only in name, and it is precisely in a name that popular prejudice lurks, which has got the mastery over the inadequate precautions of philosophers in all ages. So let us for once be more cautious. Let us be unphilosophical. Let us say that in all willing there is firstly a plurality of sensations, namely the sensation of the condition away from which we go, the sensation of the condition towards which we go, the sensation of this from and towards itself, and then besides an accompanying muscular sensation, which, even without our putting in motion arms and legs, commences its action by force of habit directly we will anything. Therefore, just as sensations, and indeed many kinds of sensations, are to be recognized as ingredients of the will, so, in the second place, thinking is also to be recognized. In every act of the will there is a ruling thought, and let us not imagine it is possible to sever this thought from the willing, as if the will would then remain over. In the third place, the will is not only a complex of sensation and thinking, but it is above all an emotion, and in fact the emotion of the command. That which is termed freedom of the will is essentially the emotion of supremacy in respect to him who must obey. I am free, he must obey. This consciousness is inherent in every will, and equally so the straining of the attention, the straight look which fixes itself exclusively on one thing, the unconditional judgment that this and nothing else is necessary now, the inward certainty that obedience will be rendered, and whatever else pertains to the position of the commander. A man who wills commands something within himself which renders obedience, or which he believes renders obedience. But now let us notice what is the strangest thing about the will, this affair so extremely complex, for which the people have only one name. Inasmuch as in the given circumstances we are at the same time the commanding and the obeying parties, and as the obeying party we know the sensations of constraint, impulsion, pressure, resistance, and motion, which usually commence immediately after the act of will. Inasmuch as, on the other hand, we are accustomed to disregard this duality, and to deceive ourselves about it by means of the synthetic term I. A whole series of erroneous conclusions, and consequently of false judgments about the will itself, has become attached to the act of willing, to such a degree that he who wills believes firmly that willing suffices for action, since in the majority of cases there's only been exercise of will when the effect of the command, consequently obedience, and therefore action, was to be expected, the appearance has translated itself into the sentiment, as if there were a necessity of effect. In a word, he who wills believes with a fair amount of certainty that will and action are somehow one. He ascribes the success, the carrying out of the willing, to the will itself, and thereby enjoys an increase of the sensation of power which accompanies all success. Freedom of will, that is the expression for the complex state of delight of the person exercising volition, who commands and at the same time identifies himself with the executor of the order, who as such enjoys also the triumph of obstacles, but thinks within himself that it was really his own will that overcame them. In this way, the person exercising volition adds the feeling of delight of his successful executive instruments, the useful underwills or undersouls, indeed our body is but a social structure composed of many souls, to his feelings of delight as commander. L'effet c'est moi. What happens here is what happens in every well-constructed and happy commonwealth, namely, that the governing class identifies itself with the successes of the commonwealth. In all willing, it is absolutely a question of commanding and obeying, on the basis, as already said, of a social structure composed of many souls, on which account a philosopher should claim the right to include willing as such within the sphere of morals, regarded as the doctrine of the relations of supremacy under which the phenomenon of life manifests itself.